Flight attendant Tiffany Miller thought she was clearing a seat for a VIP. She didn't realize the girl she just humiliated was dialing a man who could ground the entire airline with one phone call. When a black private jet screams across the runway to block their takeoff, the screams from first class are no longer about the service. The automatic glass doors of JFK Terminal 4 slid open with a hiss, admitting a rush of humid July air. For Jasmine Sterling, the heat was irrelevant. She was already 10,000 miles away, mentally walking the cobblestone paths of Oxford University. At 19, Jasmine possessed a natural, quiet elegance that usually drew eyes in any room. But today she was a ghost. She wore an oversized, vintage gray hoodie, thick black leggings, and Converse sneakers that had seen better days. Her hair was gathered in a hurried, messy bun, and heavy noise-canceling headphones hung like a collar around her neck. She didn't look like the sole heir to the Sterling Vance global fortune. She looked like a tired student who had stayed up too late studying for finals, and that was her armor. Clutched in her hand was a boarding pass for Flight 882 to London Heathrow. Seat 1, A first class. It wasn't a luxury she sought. It was a fortress of safety insisted upon by her father, Langston Sterling. His last text burned in her mind. "Keep your head down, Jas. Security will meet you at Heathrow. Love you." Jasmine approached the gate. The economy line was a serpent, winding back toward the duty-free shops. The priority lane, however, was a vacuum, empty, save for a red velvet rope and a pristine white podium. She stepped into the lane. The gate agent, a woman named Patricia, looked up. Her eyes narrowed behind thick, rectangular frames. There was no smile, no good morning, just a sharp, manicured finger pointing toward the masses. "Miss, economy boarding is in Zone 4. You need to wait your turn like everyone else." Jasmine suppressed a sigh. This was a script she had performed 1,000 times. "I'm in first class," she said, her voice a soft melody. She held out her phone. Patricia didn't look at the screen. She looked at the worn rubber of Jasmine's sneakers. She looked at the faded cotton of the hoodie. A derisive scoff escaped her lips. "This lane is for first class and Diamond Medallion members only. Please step aside so you don't block the actual customers." "I am a customer," Jasmine replied, her voice hardening. She stepped forward and pressed her phone to the scanner. Beep, beep. The screen flashed a brilliant, undeniable green. "Sterling, J Seat 1A." Patricia blinked. The blood rushed to her face, a cocktail of embarrassment and irritation. She didn't apologize. She snatched Jasmine's passport, flipped through it with aggressive speed, and shoved it back across the podium. "Go ahead," she muttered, refusing to meet Jasmine's eyes. Jasmine walked down the jet bridge, the silence of the tunnel echoing her thoughts. Just get to the seat, put the headphones on, disappear. But as she stepped through the aircraft door, she realized the nightmare was only beginning. Standing in the galley was Tiffany Miller. Tall, blonde, and wearing a uniform a size too small, her name tag glistened under the LED lights like a hunter's trophy. She was laughing with a businessman, handing him a glass of vintage champagne. Jasmine tried to move past. "Excuse me," she murmured. The laughter died. Tiffany's smile evaporated, replaced by a cold, robotic stare that could freeze the Atlantic. She stepped into the center of the aisle, physically barring Jasmine's path to the front row. "Hold on," Tiffany said, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "You're lost, sweetie. Economy is straight through that curtain. Keep walking until you hit row 30. The game of arrogance had begun, but Tiffany had no idea. She was playing against the house. Jasmine Sterling felt the weight of the entire cabin's gaze. She stood her ground, her voice a calm contrast to the storm brewing in Tiffany's eyes. I'm in seat 1A, she repeated, her tone as steady as a heart monitor. Tiffany let out a sharp, jagged laugh that echoed off the leather partitions. She turned to a man in 2A, a regular named Mr. Henderson, looking for an ally. 1A, Tiffany mocked loudly. Honey, 1A is reserved for CEOs, diplomats, and people who actually belong here. I think you might have scraped together some frequent flyer miles for an economy upgrade, but you're clearly confused. Let me see that ticket. Jasmine didn't flinch. She held up her phone. Tiffany didn't just take it. She snatched it with a force that almost sent the device skittering across the floor. A blatant violation of airline protocol that made Jasmine's pulse quicken. Tiffany squinted at the digital pass, her lip curling in a sneer. Jasmine Sterling, she read, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Well, computers glitch, sweetie. There is no way you paid for this. Look at you. We have a dress code in first class, smart casual. You look like you're heading to a high school gym. There is no dress code for a paying passenger, Jasmine countered, her patience finally beginning to fray at the edges. I paid for the seat. I am sitting in it. Now give me my phone. Tiffany held the phone just out of reach for an agonizing second, a petty power play, before dropping it into Jasmine's open palm. Fine, Tiffany hissed. Sit, but don't get comfortable. If the actual owner of that seat shows up, you're moving back to row 45, right next to the toilets. Jasmine brushed past her, the scent of Tiffany's expensive perfume clashing with the cold, sterile air of the plane. She sank into the plush leather of 1A and stared out the window, watching the luggage carts zip across the tarmac. She didn't want a drink. She didn't want a pillow. She just wanted the world to stop looking at her. But the universe, it seemed, had a different script written for today. 10 minutes before the cabin doors were set to seal, a commotion erupted at the entrance. A woman swept in, not a passenger, but a hurricane draped in faux fur. Despite the sweltering July heat, she wore a coat that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, her neck dripping in gold that rattled with every frantic step. This was Billionaire Vance, a socialite whose reputation for 3 messy divorces was only eclipsed by a temper that had made her a legend in the tabloids. This is unacceptable, Billionaire shrieked, waving a platinum card in Tiffany's face. I was promised the bulkhead. My sciatica is flaring up and I refuse to be cramped. Tiffany's transformation was instantaneous. The ice she had shown Jasmine melted into a puddle of sickening subservience. Mrs. Vance, oh, I am so sorry. There must have been a mix-up at the gate. Please calm down. I will not calm down. Billionaire pointed a ring-studded finger toward the front row. She looked at 1B, then her eyes locked onto 1A, Jasmine's seat. I hate aisle seats. I want the window. I want that seat. Jasmine froze, her forehead pressed against the cool glass of the window. She prayed, just for a moment, that she could become invisible. Tiffany looked at the wealthy, raging woman, and then at the girl in the hoodie. A wicked spark ignited in the flight attendant's eyes. It was a chance to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, please a high-profile VIP and dispose of the girl she despised. Tiffany marched over to 1A and tapped Jasmine on the shoulder, hard. Excuse me, Tiffany said, her voice dripping with a fake, sugary politeness that made Jasmine's skin crawl. We have a situation. Mrs. Vance is a diamond medallion flyer and a personal friend of our CEO. She needs this window seat for medical reasons. Jasmine turned slowly, her eyes meeting Tiffany. I'm sorry to hear about her health, Jasmine said, her voice a low, steady hum. But I booked this seat 3 months ago. It doesn't matter when you booked it, Tiffany snapped, the mask of politeness shattering instantly. I need you to move, now. Move where? Jasmine asked. To Mrs. Vance's assigned seat, 4B, Tiffany gestured vaguely toward the back. Or better yet, back to economy, where you'll probably feel more at home. I'm sure I can find you a row near the back." Jasmine took a breath. The cabin went silent. Even the rustle of Mr. Henderson's newspaper stopped. "No," Jasmine said. One word, 2 letters. It hit the cabin like a physical blow. Eleanor Vance gasped as if she'd been slapped across the face. Tiffany leaned down, her face inches from Jasmine's, her breath smelling of coffee and malice. "Excuse me," Tiffany hissed. "I said no," Jasmine repeated, locking eyes with her tormentor. "I bought this ticket, I am not moving." Tiffany straightened up, her face turning a blotchy, angry red. "Listen to me, you little brat," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "You are disrupting this flight. If you do not grab your bag and move right now, I will have you escorted off this plane by federal marshals. Do you want a criminal record? Because I can make that happen." The air in the cabin grew heavy, suffocating. Jasmine could feel her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had been raised in boardrooms. She knew how to keep her face a mask of stone, but the humiliation was a slow burn across her cheeks. "You're threatening me?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm giving you a choice," Tiffany sneered. She glanced at Eleanor, who was tapping a designer heel impatiently. "Mrs. Vance needs this seat. You are a young, healthy girl. You can sit in the back. It's called respect for your elders." "It's called theft," Jasmine corrected. "I paid $5,000 for this seat." Eleanor Vance let out a high-pitched, jagged laugh. "You, $5,000? She turned to the rest of the passengers, playing to her audience. "Does anyone actually believe this child paid $5,000 for a seat? She looks like she sells knockoff DVDs in the subway." A few passengers chuckled nervously. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the cruelty but unwilling to step into the line of fire. "I want to speak to the captain," Jasmine demanded. "The captain is busy prepping for departure," Tiffany shot back. "I am the lead flight attendant. I am the authority here, and I have decided that you are a security risk." "A security risk," Jasmine's eyebrows shot up. "Because I won't give up a seat I paid for." "Because you are being belligerent and refusing crew instructions." Tiffany's voice rose an octave, intentionally creating a scene to justify the violence she was about to call for. "You are aggressive. You are making Mrs. Vance feel unsafe." Jasmine looked around the cabin, her eyes searching for a single spark of justice. "I haven't stood up," she said. "I haven't raised my voice. Has anyone here actually felt threatened by me?" Silence. Mr. Henderson in 2A cleared his throat, but he didn't look at her. "Look, miss," he said with a patronizing sigh. "Just move. It's not worth the trouble. These ladies have a job to do." The sting of betrayal was worse than the insults. Even the nice ones just wanted the problem to vanish, regardless of who was right. Tiffany smirked, reaching up to press the call button for the ground crew. "I'm getting the gate agents," she declared. "You're coming off this plane." Jasmine realized then they weren't going to stop. She felt the hot prickle of tears in her eyes, not from sadness, but from a pure, white-hot rage. She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out her phone. "Put that away," Tiffany barked. "No recording." "I'm not recording," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy level. She unlocked the screen. Her thumb hovered over a contact she rarely used, one labeled, Daddy Private. She had wanted to be Jasmine, the student, but Tiffany Miller and Eleanor Vance had decided they wanted to meet a Sterling. Jasmine hit dial. "Jasmine." The voice on the other end was like low-frequency thunder. Langston Sterling didn't do greetings. He didn't do small talk. He heard the vibration of the air around his daughter, and he knew. "Dad," Jasmine said. Her voice was small, but it was the only sound in the silent first-class cabin. Tiffany Miller stood over her, arms crossed, a smirk of pure triumph etched onto her face. Billionaire Vance was checking her reflection in a compact mirror, oblivious to the fuse that had just been lit. "Why are you calling from the tarmac, Jas?" Langston's voice sharpened. "The flight tracker says you should be taxiing." Jasmine looked up at Tiffany. The flight attendant leaned in, whispering loud enough for the phone to pick it up. "Hang up the phone, sweetie. You're leaving. The gate agents are at the door." Jasmine ignored her. "Dad, there's a problem. They're removing me from the flight. They say I don't belong in first class. They want to give my seat to a VIP. "Who is they?" Langston asked. The calm in his voice was the calm at the eye of a Category 5 hurricane. "The lead attendant, Tiffany Miller, and a passenger, Billionaire Vance. They're calling security because I won't move to economy." "Tiffany Miller," Langston repeated, as if carving the name into a headstone. "Give her the phone." Jasmine held the device out. "He wants to speak to you." Tiffany scoffed, her eyes rolling so far back they nearly disappeared. "Oh, please, what is this? Your boyfriend? Your manager?" "I don't talk to daddies on the phone, Jasmine. I talk to people who matter. Put it away, or I'll have the police add interference with crew duties to your charges." "He's the one who paid for the ticket," Jasmine said quietly. "I think you should listen." Tiffany snatched the phone, her face twisted in a sneer. She pressed it to her ear, ready to deliver a rehearsed line about airline policy. "Listen, Mr. Sterling or whoever you are. Your daughter is being disruptive and—" Tiffany stopped. The color didn't just leave her face, it vanished, leaving her skin the color of curdled milk. Her hand, the one holding the phone, began a slow, rhythmic tremor. The cabin watched, confused, as the woman who had just been a lioness turned into a frightened rabbit. "Yes," Tiffany stammered, but the protocol, Mr. Sterling, I wasn't informed." She was being interrupted, repeatedly. Whatever Langston Sterling was saying on the other end of that line was stripping Tiffany's soul bare. "I understand," Tiffany whispered. Her eyes darted to Jasmine, no longer filled with hate but with a paralyzing, existential dread. "I'll wait." She handed the phone back to Jasmine with a shaking hand. She didn't say a word. She backed away, stumbling slightly over Billionaire Vance's designer luggage. "What was that?" Billionaire snapped, looking up from her mirror. "Who was that on the phone? Why aren't you getting this girl out of my seat?" Tiffany didn't answer her. She couldn't. She looked like she was about to vomit. Jasmine put the phone to her ear. "Dad." "Stay in your seat, Jasmine," Langston said. "Do not move an inch. Look out the window in exactly 3 minutes. I'm calling the Port Authority and the FAA. No one is taking off from JFK until I say so." Click. Jasmine lowered the phone. The cabin was buzzing now. The 2 gate agents, big men in neon vests, stepped into the galley. They looked at Tiffany, waiting for the signal to haul Jasmine out. "Tiffany," one of the agents asked. "This the one? We've got the paperwork for the refusal to fly." Tiffany looked at the agents, then at Jasmine, then at the cockpit door. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was caught between the world she thought she ruled and the God who had just called her on a cell phone. "Wait," Tiffany finally choked out. "Just wait." "Wait for what?" Billionaire Vance stood up, her faux fur swaying. "I have a dinner at the Savoy. I have a gala. Move this brat now or I'm calling the CEO myself." "Mrs. Vance, please sit down," Tiffany said, her voice cracking. "Excuse me." Billionaire's voice hit a glass-shattering pitch. "Do you know who I am? I am Billionaire Vance. My husband's firm handles the insurance for this entire airline." "And I," a new voice boomed from the front of the cabin, "am the captain of this aircraft." Captain Marcus Thorne stepped out of the flight deck. He was a veteran, a man with silver hair and 4 stripes on his shoulders that he had earned through 30 years of flawless service. He looked at the gate agents, then at the trembling Tiffany. "Tiffany, why is the door still open? We've missed our slot. We're holding up a line of 16 planes." "Captain," Tiffany pointed a trembling finger at Jasmine. Her father," he said. Before she could finish, the captain's headset crackled with a message from air traffic control. He pressed the earpiece closer, his brow furrowing. His eyes widened. He looked past Tiffany, past the gate agents, and stared directly at Jasmine Sterling in seat 1A. "Repeat that, tower," the captain asked into his lapel mic. He listened for 10 seconds. His face went pale. "Understood," the captain said. He turned to his crew, his voice dropping to a graveyard whisper. "Close the door. We aren't going to the gate." "Finally," Eleanor Vance smirked, adjusting her coat. "Now get this girl out of my seat so we can leave." The captain looked at Eleanor with a look of pure, unadulterated pity. "Mrs. Vance, you don't understand. We aren't leaving. JFK has just been placed under a localized ground stop." What?" Eleanor blinked. "Nothing is taking off," the captain said, "and the tower just informed me that we are being intercepted." "Intercepted?" Jasmine whispered, her heart skipping a beat. "By who?" The captain didn't answer. He pointed out the window. In the distance, past the rows of white and blue commercial liners, a streak of black and chrome appeared on the taxiway. It wasn't an airline jet. It was sleek. It was predatory. It was a Global 7500 private jet, painted a matte black that seemed to swallow the afternoon sun. It wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating, ignoring the signals from the ground marshals, cutting across the grass, and swinging its massive nose directly into the path of Flight 882. The heavy commercial jet groaned as the pilot slammed on the brakes. "What is that?" Mr. Henderson shouted, leaning over his seat to see. Jasmine looked out. On the side of the black jet, in elegant, understated silver lettering, was a logo, a stylized C intertwined with a V. "Sterling Vance." The black jet came to a halt mere yards from the nose of the Boeing 777, effectively pinning it in place like a butterfly on a board. Then, the door of the private jet lowered. A man stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a dark tactical jacket and aviators. Behind him, 4 men in black suits followed, their movements synchronized and lethal. The captain's radio chirped again. He looked at Jasmine, his voice trembling. "Miss Sterling, your father is on the tarmac, and he's requested a face-to-face meeting with the crew." Tiffany Miller collapsed into an empty seat in row 3, her head in her hands. She finally realized she hadn't just insulted a passenger. She had declared war on a man who owned the sky. The silence inside Flight 882 was no longer the silence of an airplane cabin. It was the silence of a courtroom right before a death sentence is read. Outside, the heat waves shimmered off the black skin of the Sterling Vance private jet, making it look like a ghost ship anchored in the middle of the runway. The 4 men in black suits formed a perimeter, their eyes hidden behind dark lenses, their presence turning a public airport into a private fortress. And then there was Langston Sterling. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked toward the boarding stairs of the Boeing 777 with the slow, deliberate stride of a man who owned the ground he walked on. Each step seemed to vibrate through the floorboards of the plane. Inside the cabin, Tiffany Miller was a shell of a human being. She was leaning against the galley counter, her breathing shallow and jagged. She watched the monitor on the internal security camera as Langston reached the door. Thump, thump. The sound of his knuckles against the pressurized door echoed through the fuselage. Captain Thorne, his hands visibly shaking, reached for the lever. "I have to let him in," he whispered, more to himself than to the crew. "If I don't, he'll have the Port Authority rip this door off its hinges." With a hiss of escaping pressure, the door swung open. The air changed instantly. The scent of expensive leather and cold, hard iron seemed to follow Langston Sterling as he stepped into the galley. He was a tall man, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that looked like they had seen the beginning and end of empires. He didn't look at the captain. He didn't look at the gate agents. He looked at Jasmine. Jasmine stood up from seat 1A. The tears she had been holding back didn't fall. Instead, they turned into a steel-like glint in her eyes. "Dad," she said softly. Langston walked past the crew as if they were furniture. He reached his daughter, placed a hand on her shoulder, and checked her, really checked her, for any sign of physical harm. "Are you hurt, Jas?" "No," she replied. "Just tired of being told where I don't belong." Langston nodded once. It was a tiny movement, but it signaled the end of the peace treaty. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the cabin until it landed on Tiffany Miller. Tiffany tried to stand straight. She tried to find that mask of corporate authority she had used to bully Jasmine. But under Langston's stare, the mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated. "You," Langston said. The word wasn't a question, it was a target. "Mr. Sterling," Tiffany squeaked, her voice failing her. "There was a misunderstanding about seating assignments. We have very strict." "I don't care about your assignments," Langston interrupted. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled every corner of the first-class cabin. "I care about the fact that my daughter showed you a valid ticket and you decided her appearance was more important than her rights. I care about the fact that you threatened a 19-year-old girl with federal charges because she wouldn't succumb to your prejudice." "I was just," Mrs. Vance needed. Tiffany gestured toward a leaner. Langston's eyes shifted to a leaner Vance. A leaner, who had spent her entire life intimidating waitstaff and retail clerks, finally met someone who existed on a level of the food chain she couldn't even see. "And you," Langston said, his voice dripping with a cold, refined venom. "A leaner, I remember your husband, Arthur, right? Vance Insurance Group. We did a bit of business 3 years ago. Or rather, I allowed him to handle the reinsurance for my shipping fleet." Eleanor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The faux fur on her shoulders seemed to wilt. "Tell Arthur he has until the market closes today to find a new primary client," Langston said casually. "Sterling Vance is terminating all contracts with his firm, effective immediately." "You can't do that," Eleanor gasped, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. "That's 40% of our revenue." "Watch me," Langston replied. He turned back to Tiffany. The flight attendant was now clutching the edge of the drink cart so hard her knuckles were white. "As for you, Ms. Miller," Langston continued, "I had a very interesting conversation with the CEO of this airline while I was taxiing over here. It turns out, this isn't the first time you've had complaints regarding your treatment of certain passengers, but it will be the last." Tiffany's eyes widened. What does that mean?" "It means that, as of 4 minutes ago, the Sterling Vance Group has entered an agreement to acquire a controlling interest in this airline's parent company," Langston said. He checked his watch. "The paperwork is being filed digitally as we speak. I don't like it when my daughter's travel is interrupted, so I decided to buy the airline to ensure it never happens again." A collective gasp went up from the passengers. Mr. Henderson in 2A dropped his glass of champagne, the liquid soaking into the carpet. "Captain Thorne," Langston said, turning to the pilot. "Yes, sir." The captain stood at attention. "You are a good pilot with a clean record. You will keep your job. But this woman, he pointed at Tiffany, and these gate agents who were ready to use force on a peaceful passenger. They are no longer employees of this company. Get them off my plane. Sir, Tiffany sobbed, please, I have a mortgage. I've been with this airline for 10 years. Langston Sterling stepped closer, his shadow falling over her like an eclipse. You should have thought about your mortgage when you were looking at my daughter's hoodie and deciding she wasn't worth your respect, Langston whispered. You wanted her in the back of the plane. Now you can find a seat in the back of the unemployment line. He turned to the men in suits. Escort them off, now. As the security team moved forward, the cabin felt like it was finally breathing again. But the drama wasn't over. Jasmine looked at her father, then at the empty seat 1A, and then at the sea of faces in the cabin, people who had watched her be humiliated and said nothing. Dad, Jasmine said, her voice echoing with a new kind of strength. I don't want to fly on this plane anymore. Langston smiled, the first real smile of the day. It was a proud, sharp smile. I figured you'd say that, Jas. The Global 7500 is fueled and ready. Your luggage is already being transferred. Jasmine picked up her backpack. She walked toward the exit, but she stopped right in front of Tiffany, who was being led away in tears. Jasmine reached into her pocket, pulled out the $20 bill she had intended to use for an in-flight snack, and tucked it into Tiffany's vest pocket. Keep it, Jasmine said, her voice cold and clear. You're going to need it more than I do. The invisible girl walked out of the door, followed by the man who had moved mountains to protect her. Behind them, the commercial airliner sat paralyzed on the runway, a giant silenced by the power of one girl who refused to move. The cabin of Flight 882 was still reeling from the exit of the Sterling family. The silence that remained was heavy, thick with the scent of high-stakes destruction. Eleanor Vance sat frozen in seat 1B, her hands, once busy adjusting her faux fur and checking her reflection, were now trembling so violently she had to clench them into fists. She looked around the cabin, desperate for a friendly face, but the other passengers, the same ones who had chuckled at her jokes minutes before, were now staring at her with a mixture of horror and disgust. Captain, Eleanor croaked, her voice sounding like dry leaves. You have to tell him it was a mistake. My husband, Arthur. He'll fix this. Captain Thorne, who was still standing by the open door watching the black Sterling Vance jet taxi away, didn't even turn around. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice flat. Mr. Sterling didn't just fire a flight attendant today. He dismantled your life. I suggest you call your husband before the news hits the wires. Eleanor lunged for her phone. Her fingers fumbled with the screen. She dialed Arthur's direct line. 1 ring, 2, 3. Arthur, darling, it's me, she hissed into the receiver as soon as he picked up. Something happened at JFK. There was this girl, and her father, Langston Sterling. Eleanor, Arthur's voice came through the line, but it didn't sound like her husband. It sounded like a man who had just seen a ghost. What did you do? I just wanted my seat, Arthur. The girl was being difficult, and the attendant. The girl was Jasmine Sterling, Eleanor, Arthur roared, his voice cracking with a desperation she had never heard in 30 years of marriage. Do you have any idea what's happening? I just got a call from the board of directors. Sterling Vance pulled their reinsurance contracts. Within 5 minutes, 3 of our biggest partners followed suit. Our stock is in free fall. They're calling it the Sterling sell-off. We've lost $400 million in 20 minutes. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. 400 million. We're bankrupt, Eleanor, Arthur whispered, the sound of a man breaking. The firm is gone. The house in the Hamptons, the penthouse, it's all being leveraged. The board is voting to remove me. They're saying I'm a liability because of your public behavior. What were you thinking? I didn't know, she screamed, her voice echoing through the silent first-class cabin. That's the problem, Billionaire, Arthur snapped. You didn't think you needed to know. You thought you could treat people like dirt because you had a platinum card. Well, that card just bounced. Don't call me again today. I have to call the lawyers. Click. The line went dead. Billionaire Vance let the phone slip from her hand. It hit the carpeted floor with a dull thud, the sound of an era ending. She looked up and saw the gate agents, the men who were supposed to remove Jasmine, now being led off the plane by Port Authority police. They were no longer the authority. They were just men who had followed a bully and lost everything for it. Meanwhile, a mile away at the private aviation terminal, the atmosphere was vastly different. Jasmine Sterling stepped into the cabin of the Global 7500. It was an oasis of calm. The seats were cream-colored Italian leather, the wood was hand-polished walnut, and the air smelled of fresh lilies and expensive coffee. Langston was already seated at a wide mahogany desk at the front of the cabin, 3 tablet screens glowing in front of him. He was typing rapidly, his face a mask of cold efficiency. Sit down, Jas, he said, not looking up. The flight plan is filed. We're taking off in 10 minutes, direct to London. Jasmine sat, but she didn't relax. Did you really buy the airline, Dad? Langston stopped typing. He looked at his daughter, his eyes softening just a fraction. I bought enough of it to ensure that the board does exactly what I say. I don't like bullies, Jasmine. I spent my whole life building this company so that you wouldn't have to deal with people like Tiffany Miller. But I realized today that I haven't been doing enough. What do you mean? I mean that there are thousands of Tiffany's in this world, Langston said, his voice dropping to that dangerous rumble. And they think they can get away with it because people are too tired or too afraid to fight back. Today, we showed them what happens when you pick the wrong target. But tomorrow we change the rules. How? Langston turned one of the tablets toward her. It was a draft of a press release. Sterling Vance Group announces the Integrity Initiative. New airline ownership pledges zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and passenger mistreatment. Former flight attendant Tiffany Miller and gate staff blacklisted from aviation industry. It's not just about the firing, Langston explained. I'm making it impossible for them to work in this industry again. If you use your position of power to humiliate someone, you lose the right to hold that position. Period. Jasmine looked at the screen, then out the window at the JFK skyline. She felt a strange mix of relief and weight. She had her seat. She had her dignity. But she also realized that the world she lived in was one where justice often required a billionaire's intervention. Dad, Jasmine asked softly. Yes, Jas. Can we make sure the other passengers on that flight get something? They all sat there and watched it happen. Some of them were even laughing. Langston leaned back, a predatory glint in his eyes. I'm already ahead of you. I have the passenger manifest. Everyone in first class who sat by and watched you get insulted. Their loyalty accounts have been frozen. They'll find their next few flights a lot less comfortable. The engines of the private jet began to whine, a high-pitched song of power and preparation. As the plane began to move, Jasmine saw Flight 882 in the distance, still sitting on the tarmac, grounded and humiliated. She realized then that her father hadn't just saved her flight. He had conducted a masterclass in consequences. But as the jet climbed into the New York sky, Jasmine's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She swiped to read the message. You think you won because you have money? This isn't over. You ruined my life over a seat. See you in London, princess. Jasmine's heart went cold. Tiffany Miller hadn't gone quietly. And in the dark corners of the internet, A video was already starting to go viral, not of Tiffany's cruelty, but of Langston Sterling's arrogance. The storm wasn't over. It was just moving. Jasmine leaned back in her plush seat aboard the Sterling Vance private jet, the hum of the engines providing a false sense of security. She closed her eyes, trying to erase the memory of Tiffany's sneer and Alina's shrill laughter. But her phone wouldn't let her. Buzz, buzz, buzz. It started as a few mentions, then dozens, then thousands. Jasmine opened her social media feed, and her breath hitched. The top trending hashtag in the United States wasn't about the weather or the upcoming elections. It was billionaire bully. Someone, likely a passenger in economy who had only seen the final moments, had recorded the scene of Langston Sterling boarding the plane with his security team. But the video didn't show Tiffany's insults. It didn't show Alina Vance's entitlement. The video began with Langston Sterling pointing at a crying Tiffany Miller and saying, "You are no longer an employee of this company. Get her off my plane." The caption on the video, which already had 6 million views, read, "Watch this billionaire use his power to fire a hardworking flight attendant on the spot because his princess daughter didn't like her tone. This is what's wrong with America." The comments section was a battlefield. "Eat the rich," one user wrote. "She looks like a spoiled brat in that hoodie, probably faked the whole thing," said another. And then the most chilling one, "We know she's heading to London. Someone should greet her at Heathrow." Jasmine felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead. She looked over at her father. Langston was still on his laptop, his face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. He was a titan of industry, but he was a dinosaur when it came to the speed of the internet. "Dad," Jasmine said, her voice trembling, "you need to see this." She handed him the phone. Langston scrolled through the comments, his jaw tightening until the muscles in his neck stood out like cords. He watched the video, the way it was edited to make him look like a tyrant and Jasmine look like a silent, smug accomplice. "They're calling for a boycott of the airline," Jasmine whispered, "and they're posting my university address in London." Langston didn't panic. He handed the phone back, his eyes turning into 2 pieces of flint. "This is a coordinated strike, Jasmine. This isn't just the internet. Someone is feeding this." "Tiffany?" Jasmine asked. "Tiffany Miller isn't smart enough to manipulate an algorithm this fast," Langston growled. "But the Vance family, they have friends in the media. This is Arthur's revenge. He can't save his company, so he's trying to destroy our reputation." Langston stood up and walked to the satellite phone. "Get me Marcus on the line," he barked into the receiver. "And call the Sterling Vance PR crisis team in London. I want every frame of the actual security footage from that cabin retrieved. I don't care if you have to buy the cloud server it's stored on. Get it now." But the digital world moves faster than corporate lawyers. By the time the jet was halfway across the ocean, a new video had emerged. It was an interview with Tiffany Miller, filmed in the back of a taxi. She was tearful, her mascara smudged, looking every bit the victim. "I was just doing my job," Tiffany sobbed to the camera. "I asked for her ticket, and she started screaming about who her father was. Then this man, this billionaire, showed up with armed guards. I've never been so scared in my life. I have 2 kids to feed, and he took my career away because I did my job." The internet exploded. The hardworking mom versus the evil empire narrative was too juicy to resist. News outlets picked it up. "The tarmac terror," they called Langston. Inside the jet, the atmosphere had turned claustrophobic. Jasmine felt like the walls were closing in. She went to the small bathroom and looked in the mirror. She looked at the gray hoodie, the one she loved because it was comfortable and anonymous. Now it was a symbol of her supposed faked humility. She realized then that being a Sterling wasn't just about having power. It was about being a target. If she stayed silent, the lie would become the truth. If she fought back using her father's lawyers, she would just look like more of a bully. She walked back out into the cabin. "Dad, tell the PR team to stand down." Langston looked up, the phone still at his ear. "What?" "Jasmine, they're dragging your name through the mud. We need to sue every outlet that carries this." "No," Jasmine said, her voice gaining a sudden, sharp clarity. "That's what they expect. They expect us to use money to silence them. That's why people are angry." "So what do you suggest?" Jasmine gripped the back of her chair. "We don't use lawyers. We use the truth. You said you retrieved the cabin footage, the internal cameras that record audio." "We have it," Langston said, "but it's proprietary company property. Releasing it involves legal hurdles." "You own the company now, Dad," Jasmine reminded him. "The hurdles are gone. Post the raw, unedited footage. No commentary. No PR spin. Just the 15 minutes from the moment I walked into first class to the moment you arrived. Let the world see Tiffany Miller's politeness for themselves." Langston looked at his daughter. For the first time, he didn't see a child he needed to protect. He saw a partner. He saw the future of the Sterling Vance legacy. "It's a risk," Langston said. "People might still find a way to twist it." "Let them try," Jasmine said. "But I'm not going to London to hide in a dorm room while a bully becomes a national hero." Langston nodded slowly. He tapped a few keys on his laptop. "The file is 10 gigabytes. It'll take 20 minutes to upload to the main server. I'll set it to go live on all our official channels at midnight London time." Jasmine sat back down and watched the flight tracker. They were passing over the coast of Ireland. The world was waiting for her at Heathrow. The cameras, the protesters, the angry mobs, they were all gathered at the gate, ready to tear her down. She checked her phone one last time. Tiffany Miller had just posted a link to a GoFundMe page. She had already raised $50,000 from supporters of the working class. Jasmine smiled. It was a cold, Sterling smile. 20 minutes, Dad," she whispered. "Let's see how much they like the sequel." The countdown had begun. The Sterling family was about to drop a digital bomb that would either clear their name or burn their empire to the ground. Heathrow Airport was a sea of flashing lights and angry shouts. As Jasmine and Langston stepped off the jet into the private lounge, they were greeted not by the quiet efficiency of British customs, but by the muffled roar of a mob gathered outside the terminal gates. News vans with satellite dishes pointed toward the sky like bayonets. British tabloids, hungry for a scandal, had teamed up with American cancel culture activists who had tracked the Sterling flight in real time. "Mr. Sterling, Jasmine!" a reporter screamed as they caught a glimpse of them through the glass. "How do you justify firing a mother of two over a seat assignment? Do you think your wealth makes you immune to basic human decency?" Jasmine felt the familiar coldness settle in her chest. She looked at the crowd, people holding signs that read "Respect the working class" and "Cancel Sterling." They didn't know her. They didn't know that she spent her weekends volunteering at a community center or that the hoodie she wore was a gift from her late grandmother. To them, she was just a silhouette of privilege. Langston paused. His hand tightened on the handle of his briefcase. For a moment, Jasmine thought he was going to roar back, to use his voice to crush the noise. But he simply looked at his watch. 3, 2, 1, he whispered. In that exact second, thousands of phones in the crowd chimed simultaneously. Notification pings rang out like a chorus of digital bells. The Sterling Vance official account had just posted a single link. No caption, just, "Flight 882, the unedited truth." The roar of the crowd didn't stop, it changed. It shifted from a scream of anger to a low, confused murmur. People stopped shouting to look at their screens. Jasmine watched a young man in the front row, wearing a Boycott Sterling shirt. He hit play on the video. The footage was crystal clear, captured by the high-definition 360-degree security cameras Langston had installed when he began the acquisition process. It didn't start with Langston's arrival. It started 40 minutes earlier. The crowd watched as Tiffany Miller sneered at Jasmine. They heard her voice, sharp and ugly. "You look like you're heading to a high school gym. Move back to row 45, right next to the toilets." They watched Eleanor Vance enter the cabin, saw her shove her designer bag into Jasmine's personal space, and heard her laugh. "Does anyone actually believe this child paid $5,000 for a seat? She looks like she sells knockoff DVDs in the subway." And then, the moment that turned the tide. The camera caught a close-up of Tiffany's face as Jasmine showed her the ticket. Tiffany didn't just ignore it. She leaned in and whispered a racial slur, a word so vile it made the people in the Heathrow crowd gasp in unison. The video didn't stop there. It showed the gate agents laughing while Jasmine sat silently, her head down, trying to maintain her dignity while being bullied by 3 adults. The silence that fell over the Heathrow lounge was deafening. The young man in the Boycott shirt looked up from his phone. His face was flushed with shame. He slowly lowered his sign. All around him, other protesters were doing the same. The reporters, sensing the shift in the wind, began frantically typing new headlines. The hardworking mom narrative was dying in real time. But the real explosion was happening back in the United States. Tiffany Miller's GoFundMe page, which had reached $80,000, suddenly vanished. The platform had issued a statement. "Fundraiser removed for violation of terms regarding fraudulent claims and hate speech. All donors will be refunded." Tiffany's interview video was being ratioed, flooded with millions of comments calling her out for her lies. Inside the lounge, Jasmine's phone buzzed. It was a private message from an account she didn't recognize. "I'm sorry, I was on that flight. I was the one who recorded the first video. I didn't see the beginning, I thought. I'm so sorry, Jasmine." Jasmine looked at the message, then at the window. The mob was dispersing. The anger had evaporated, replaced by the awkward realization that they had been weaponized by a bully. "It's working, Jas," Langston said, his voice a low vibration of triumph. "The Vance Insurance Group just lost their final 2 board members. Arthur Vance has officially resigned. And Tiffany Miller, she just deleted all her social media accounts." "It's not enough," Jasmine said. Langston looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean? We cleared your name. We destroyed the people who attacked you." Jasmine turned to him, her eyes burning with a fire he hadn't seen before. "We defended ourselves, Dad. That's what Sterlings do. But what about the next girl? The one who doesn't have a father with a private jet? The one who gets kicked to the back of the plane and nobody ever finds the footage?" She walked toward the exit, toward the few remaining cameras. "Where are you going?" Langston asked. "I'm going to give them the ending they didn't expect," she replied. Jasmine stepped out of the private terminal. The flashes were blinding. A dozen microphones were shoved into her face. "Jasmine, Jasmine, now that the truth is out, are you going to sue Tiffany Miller for defamation?" one reporter yelled. Jasmine waited. She let the silence stretch for 5, 10, 15 seconds. The suspense was a physical weight. "No," Jasmine said, her voice amplified by the quiet. "I'm not going to sue her. That would be using my power to crush someone who is already down. I'm not her." The reporters leaned in, mesmerized. "Instead," Jasmine continued, "I am announcing that the Sterling Vance Group is establishing the 1A Foundation. We are using the money my father would have spent on legal fees to fund a national advocacy program for airline passenger rights. We are also creating a scholarship for students from underrepresented backgrounds who, like me, are often told they don't belong in the front row of life. She looked directly into the lens of the main news camera, her eyes locking with millions of viewers across the ocean. Tiffany Miller thought she was putting me in my place, Jasmine said. She didn't realize she was giving me a platform. To Tiffany, to Alina, and to everyone who thinks a hoodie determines a person's worth. Thank you. You didn't break me. You woke me up. As Jasmine walked toward her waiting car, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. Behind her, the digital world was already crowning a new kind of hero. Not a billionaire's daughter, but a woman who had turned a moment of humiliation into a legacy of justice. But there was one final piece of the puzzle left to settle. One final encounter that would close the book on Flight 882 forever. 1 year later. The Washington Dulles International Airport was bustling with the frantic energy of the holiday season. Snow lashed against the massive glass panes of the terminal, grounded flights, and frayed nerves. Jasmine Sterling walked through the terminal. She was 20 now, a year wiser and a world stronger. She still wore a hoodie, this one a deep navy blue and her signature Converse. She had just finished a semester at Oxford and was heading home for Christmas. She didn't have her father's security team today. She didn't have the private jet. She wanted to feel the pulse of the world she was trying to change. She felt a bit parched and stopped at a small, cramped coffee kiosk near Gate B42. The line was long, and the woman behind the counter was moving with a frantic, desperate energy. Next, the worker barked, her voice raspy and tired. Jasmine stepped forward. The woman behind the counter didn't look up. She was wearing a stained green apron. Her hair, once perfectly manicured, was now frizzy and pinned back with cheap plastic clips. Her name tag was crooked. It read, Tiffany. Jasmine felt a jolt of recognition that sat like lead in her stomach. Tiffany Miller. The woman who had once ruled the first-class cabin of a Boeing 777 was now foaming milk in a high-traffic airport terminal for $12 an hour. The blacklist Langston had mentioned wasn't just a threat, it was a reality. No airline in the Western world would hire her. She was a toxic asset, a viral villain whose face was burned into the memory of every HR manager in aviation. Tiffany finally looked up. What can I get for? The words died in her throat. The plastic cup in Tiffany's hand slipped, clattering onto the counter. She stared at Jasmine, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock, shame, and a flickering, desperate fear. The silence between them was an ocean. Jasmine, Tiffany whispered. It wasn't a sneer this time, it was a plea. Jasmine looked at her. She didn't see the monster from Flight 882. She saw a broken woman who had lost her career, her reputation, and her pride. Behind Tiffany, a businessman checked his watch and huffed. Hey, I've got a flight to catch. Can we move it along? Tiffany flinched. It was the same impatient tone she used to use on others. A bottle of water, please, Jasmine said softly. Tiffany reached into the cooler with shaking hands. She placed the bottle on the counter, her head bowed, unable to meet Jasmine's gaze. That will be $4. Jasmine reached into her pocket. She pulled out a $20 bill and placed it on the counter. Tiffany began to reach for the register to get change, but Jasmine placed her hand over the bill. Keep it, Jasmine said. Tiffany looked up, tears finally welling in her tired eyes. Why? She choked out. After what I did, after everything, why would you help me? Jasmine leaned in slightly, her voice a calm, steady melody that cut through the noise of the terminal. Because, Tiffany, Jasmine said, unlike you, I don't need to step on people to feel tall. I don't give you this because of who you are. I give it to you because of who I am. Jasmine picked up the water. Good luck, Tiffany, she said. I hope you find a way to be better. Jasmine turned and walked away. She didn't look back to see Tiffany sobbing into her apron. She didn't look back to see the businessman apologize for his tone. She just walked toward the glass doors of the premium lounge, a lounge she now partially owned. That is the story of how one act of prejudice brought down an entire airline's leadership and built a legacy of justice. It is a powerful reminder that the person you treat with contempt today might be the one holding your future in their hands tomorrow. Tiffany Miller thought she was crushing a powerless teenager, but she was actually waking a sleeping giant. In the end, arrogance cost her a career, while integrity gave Jasmine a mission. It serves as a lesson to us all. Treat every single person with respect, not because of their status, not because of their clothes, and not because of their bank account, but because your character is the only thing you truly own. The Sterling Vance logo now hangs in every terminal, a symbol of a new era in travel where the 1A Foundation ensures no one is ever told they don't belong. Because in the sky, we are all just travelers, and on the ground, we are all human. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and the power of standing your ground, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that stories of justice and integrity still matter. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode of our dramatic chronicles. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Jasmine was right to forgive Tiffany at the end, or did Tiffany deserve even more than she got? I read every single comment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.